The film opens in a city that is currently governed by the military. The population is infected with a fatal virus, prompting the majority of them to flee to another city. However, their attempts are thwarted by soldiers who force the residents to remain in the city. Any who disagree with the military's decision will be transported to isolation camps. A commander called Stone is seen in the following scenario beating the wife of one of his rebellious men, John. Stone finds Joan is aiding people in escape from the isolation camp. Stone threatened to kill his wife Susan if John did not reveal the whereabouts of the residents who had fled from the isolation camp. Stone planned to murder Susan right in front of him since John refused to give him the truth. Even though it has been 3 years, John still cannot forget his loving wife. While hiding, John surreptitiously practices self-defense in the hopes of one day exacting revenge on his wife. It is eventually revealed that John was a member of Stone's special forces. Hundreds of innocent citizens suspected of being afflicted with a hazardous virus were slaughtered by the special forces. In actuality, Stone engineered the virus as a distraction for his advantage. Citizens had become victims of his selfishness. John, who still follows his conscience, passionately opposes his superior's horrible conduct. However, based on the findings of the tests, John is resistant to the virus that has infected the city. Therefore, the medical team intended to create a vaccine from his blood. John refused and, after beating them off, managed to flee the camp and is now hiding in the wilderness, still lamenting the murder of his wife and feeling terrible for killing innocent folks. While pondering his fate, John is interrupted by the arrival of an injured lady, whom he takes inside his hut. The woman wakes up the next day and confesses her name is Maria. When John assists her in removing a bullet stuck in her body, he is astounded to discover that it is a tracking device rather than a bullet. When John withdrew a bullet from Maria's body, she passed out. He noticed a peculiar barcode on Maria's wrist and instantly realized she was being targeted by the special forces. When Maria awoke, John invited her to spend some time with him in his cabin. He did, however, warn her that she would have to leave shortly, since he did not want to get in trouble, because he was also a target of the Special Forces. 2 days later, a party of Special Forces personnel arrived at John's cabin, directed there by GPS. When they asked John where Maria was, he disregarded them and they decided to investigate the hut. Fortunately, John was able to incapacitate them, and Maria was able to extract one of them and flee. Maria realizes that John is not your average person, and wants to learn more about him, but John refuses to divulge his identity to her. The news of the killings of the Special Forces men reaches their 2 superiors, Roy and Lucy, and they intend to report it to their commander, who is none other than Stone, the guy who murdered John's wife at the opening of the film. Meanwhile, John is busy erecting a fort in his hiding area, certain that additional members of the Special Forces would arrive to retaliate. Later that evening, Maria confides in John and explains why she is being pursued by the Special Forces. Maria's DNA, like John's, is immune to the virus, thus they want to utilize her. Maria is hesitant to contribute her DNA, since she is aware that the armed forces will only deliver the vaccination to specific populations. They are aware that the Special Forces will not assist impoverished residents stricken by the virus, and will instead utilize the vaccination to seize control of the city. Maria and John met by chance. Maria had the same disease as him, but the difference is that John had previously lost his loving wife. Maria admits to John that she was a robber in the past, but the viral breakout killed most of the convicts and prison guards, and Maria was fortunate enough to be immune to the infection. The next day, John trains Maria how to defend herself with firearms, but 3 men of the Special Forces arrive shortly thereafter. Knowing what is going on, John purposefully lures them away by entering a cabin and shooting them from within. Nevertheless, one of them manages to grab Maria. He commands John to emerge from his hiding place, and John shoots him from the hut. After leaving the cabin, the Special Forces superiors are unaware that John, a former member of their Special Forces and a superb fighter, was defending Maria. John and Maria are now preparing for the arrival of the next group. John pulls out a weapon he hasn't used in a long time, and asks Maria to fetch some water from a nearby lake. Maria is unexpectedly encircled by soldiers of the Special Forces who have just arrived, presuming their primary target has been seized. Roy instantly tells this to Stone, the commander, but before he can finish, John comes and begins shooting at them. Maria is saved yet again by John, but Roy is still alive and promptly tells what has occurred to Stone and requests reinforcements. Commander Stone orders his troops not to murder Maria, but rather to capture her alive. The assigned forces arrive, and despite being apprehended, Maria manages to murder the members of the special forces. Stone learns of the murder of his forces, and quickly dispatches extra troops, directing them to assassinate the person who has been assisting Maria. When the extra forces arrive at John's cabin, gunfights and scuffles erupt once more, but John defeats the special forces, because he has devised a strategy to repel their attacks, and is also highly familiar with the area. Members of the special forces, on the other hand, appear to have difficulties attacking until, in the end, they suffer the same fate as the prior troops. Hundreds of more troops come, and this time they discover a tunnel near John's cottage, and promptly report to Lucy. Maria unexpectedly hides above the passage and fires on them all, until no one is left. Stone saw he needed to adjust his approach after his men were slain and lured John into the tunnel. John was surveying the situation in the jungle when he bumped across Roy, an old buddy of his. A battle quickly erupted between them, and Roy proved to be a powerful foe. John was trying to keep up with Roy's strikes, and had to endure many falls. Maria, unfortunately, had been kidnapped at the same moment. Even though he wasn't dead, John managed to get back up and wanted to locate Maria. Meanwhile, Roy had led Maria to the tunnel with Stone's troops. Through the moans of the dead, John heard Stone's commands, telling his troops to congregate in the tunnel. Despite the possible risk, John dashed to the tunnel, unknowing that it was a trap. Inside the tunnel, John ran into Roy again, and they battled again. Meanwhile, Stone and his warriors waited at the end of the tunnel for Roy. John had a tough time keeping up with Roy, but he ultimately overpowered him. After shooting Roy, John rushed to get Maria out of the tunnel, only to discover that the army had already sealed the entrance and exit. John and Maria had no choice but to battle their way out of the predicament. Another shootout followed. John and Maria were successful in defeating the special forces, but other forces came not long after. John tossed smoke bombs to cover their vision, and hurried towards the exit to provide a chance to flee. Despite being injured by a shot from Lucy, he survived and entered a room with Maria, instructing her to hide until it was declared safe. He tried to entice the opposing forces out of the tunnel, but Stone and his troops were already waiting for him at the end. John had no option but to give up. Finally, John confronted the assassin of his wife. Stone saw why Maria was so difficult to apprehend, since John had been assisting her the entire time. Stone asked John where Maria was, but even when tortured, John refused to tell him. Unable to obtain any information, Stone challenged John to a one-on-one duel, which John eventually won, proving himself in front of Stone's troops. Stone then commanded his soldiers to give him a weapon, but none of them would obey owing to their animosity of their dictatorial boss. Stone eventually forced a firearm from one of his guys, but he was shot with the rifle he was holding at the same moment. Maria then stepped out and surrendered, offering them 2 grenades and threatening to blow herself up if Lucy did not let John free. Lucy agreed to Maria's request, and she was escorted to the headquarters while they left John in the jungle. It comes out that John had previously submitted his blood sample to Maria for them to use it as a vaccine. Finally, a vaccination was created using John and Maria's blood samples, allowing the residents to live happily in the city.